I'm going to talk next about 5G and actually more specifically, less about the technology of 5G, more about the possibility of what it's going to enable. But before we get started, 5G at its core is literally just the next generation of mobile spectrum. It's like 3G, it's like 4G, it's just the next evolution of that. And before we get started, I'll just give you some context, as a consumer, what this might mean for you in a day-to-day world. So if you think about downloading a movie on 3G a few years ago, you're talking about 26 hours to download a full-length movie. Fast forward a few years to 4G, and you're talking about minutes. Fast forward to 5G, and you're talking about quicker than me finishing this sentence. You have a full-length 4K movie downloaded over 5G. So we're talking thousands of times faster than what we're currently experiencing. A lot less latency, which is super, super important when we're starting to think about things like autonomous vehicles. Battery life, so some simple conveniences like, your battery dying when you're traveling interstate like mine is now is just a thing of the past. And then things like, emergency response vehicles, et cetera, the black spots will be non-existent. So each of these benefits are going to bring a whole lot of benefit, not only to consumer, but helping enable the next explosion of connected things. So think about scalability, flexibility, the convenience that's going to come with it, and it will be absolutely critical for time-critical industries such as emergency response. But it's also coming with a huge amount of expectation. So it's going to fuel this explosion of new products. It's going to help new industries emerge. It's going to help increase productivity within existing organizations and across disparate workforces. And it's going to, there's an expectation that small business growth is going to open up to more global competition. A lot of people are talking about it as being the wireless panacea, being the next massive thing, the last thing that we experience in wireless. But with all these expectations, it's going to, how much is it going to live up to this expectation? And how quickly can we move to a world in which this expectation can be delivered? What we do know, however, is it will become the big enabler for the next explosion of connected things. What we have today, we have structural limitations in what can be connected from a bandwidth, from a speed, and from a latency perspective on our existing networks. When we fast forward to 5G and we get the speed, we get the bandwidth, we reduce the latency, all of a sudden we have the capacity to fuel this next explosion. So things like, at Mobile World Congress for the last few years, it's been front and center. What it is now, however, is there's unilateral agreement across the mobile network operators of what it is and what the spectrum is going to look like. The latency is going to be good enough to power a world of autonomous vehicles. The bandwidth, it's going to be enough for the next evolution of VR and AR because structurally it's not there at the moment. The reliability required for things like emergency vehicles, and I mentioned that before, and then the speed demanded for content-hungry consumers that's only going to continue to grow.
"5G presents great opportunities, especially for people like me who stream live on various social networks. And if we can reach out to more people across the world affordably, I think that's a great opportunity."
One of the exciting things about 5G is that it enables this layer of artificial intelligence that isn't possible today, because that speed allows us to have processing around emotions and understanding what other people are seeing and feeling in a way that we just can't do today. Not just my devices, but also my friends and family, so that in real time, I can be able to not just see them, but also feel their presence in the room next to me, even though they may be half a world away.
The real opportunity, I think, is the virtualization that we have experienced as humans. We have moved ourselves and all of our things that we own into a virtual world, but we don't know how to interact with them. In the future, there will be a scenario where our homes actually understand us more than we understand ourselves, for our homes to actually talk to us, or even more importantly, serve us. And as we are perhaps on our way home, The car tells the house where we are, and as we're outside, the house has prepared our dinner for us and it's waiting for us as we come through the door.
Their challenges with 5G are going to be with sensors, the amount of sensors that are going to be needed in order to allow a car to drive or a person to be followed in a smart city is massive, and the massive data that's going to be collected, it's going to be an overwhelming chore to store.
5G is going to fuel the future for all of us in our connected roads, in our smart homes, in our smart cities, which means that when we think of healthcare, when we think of emergency response, when we think of business opportunities, 5G is about speed, and speed is everything when everything is connected.
So just a few things there to sort of back up from Mobile World Congress this year. Another interesting thing about 5G is there's going to be a peer-to-peer protocol with it. Now, whether that's around from launch or it's introduced over time, but peer-to-peer is going to enable things like autonomous cars to talk to each other and not rely on the networks and the mobile network operators and the infrastructure that sits behind what we currently have and enable devices to talk to each other locally at speed with zero latency. So you can see how this technology is going to be really, really key as we shift towards that world. Now, it doesn't matter where we look, there is going to continue to be an explosion of connected devices. So here's some stats from the GSMA, 24 billion connected devices within a couple of years of now, 12 of which are, similar to what we're used to every day, the phone that we have in our pocket. So 12 billion devices. So almost double the current world population in terms of connected phones. But it's less about what's being connected and more about the value of what this is going to provide when we have these things that are connected, when we're gathering data across all these different types of devices, et cetera, et cetera. And the value comes back in so many different ways. So if you think about, we're gathering all this stuff, we're using it to fuel AI and decision making, we're increasing the speed to market, we're improving our customer experience based on collecting that data and giving you information that you've never had before. It's helping you reduce costs, supply chain, logistics, productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So the benefits are going to come back in so many ways. I'm going to move on now and show you a video from Jason Silver just to paint a little bit of a picture of what a world of this exploding connected devices might look like for you and I in our daily worlds.
Now that we are extending intelligent sensors into everything, into the world of everyday objects, all of a sudden these objects are going to be endowed with agency. They're going to be endowed with the ability to give us feedback. The world is going to become intelligent and responsive and going to anticipate our needs. The world is going to feel like an extension of our mindedness. When everything becomes linked with everything else, you walk into a room and the room knows how you like the lighting, and the curtain is automatically raised, and the computer offers you your favorite snack.
It is all a little bit Total Recall-esque, but that's here and now. And 5G and these advances in these sort of spectrum is only going to help fuel this further explosion. If we think about smart home at the moment, traditionally smart home devices are entered via some sort of security or monitoring. But very, very quickly over the last couple of years, the explosion of voice, Google Homes and Echoes and that sort of thing are really helping explode these numbers in terms of connectivity in the home. Currently, we've got smart home devices in about 20% of homes, expected to increase to 50% in the next few years. This is happening. I've got a couple of them already. The introduction said I was a geek. Yes, I play Alexa off against Google Home, and it's very, very interesting to see how they both respond. But the more we have things connected, the more we can move into things like energy management, things like health. So not too far away, we're going to be able to have sensors in our home that monitor our lifestyle, when we wake up, when we go to bed, how we're eating, what the air quality is in the home, and it's going to help us move towards a prevention rather than a cure-based society. And I'll touch on that a little bit later because that has huge implications for different verticals. Just going to touch on VR, and before I play this video, I just want to give some context to the video. So this is a guy here His name is Blake, actually, a friend of mine, wearing a VR headset. Up the top there is an 8K live camera broadcasting live over 5G. And you'll see a screen just in front of Blake, which is showing what he is seeing. And it will show you the minuscule latency of 5K live being broadcast over 5G. The second part of the video, they switched to an 8K camera being remote on location, and you can see where this is really headed. Remember, this is 8K. This is what we don't even have as consumers yet. We're switching over to the outside broadcast of the camera now. So think about the impacts of this on certain industries. So think about entertainment. So think about going and seeing, Foo Fighters at Madison Square Garden. How many tickets can you sell to Madison Square Garden? A couple of $100 a ticket. Imagine a world where you could be selling 5 million tickets at $5 a ticket or $10 a ticket and broadcasting this sort of content to anywhere, any location, in the comfort of their own home, in full surround sound, full 8K. This is the sort of possibility that is going to be enabled by 5G. Think about some other applications as well. So remote medical. So there was an example at Mobile World Congress here in a video showing a surgeon operating on a patient in a remote location with robotics over 5G. So it's only going to help fuel an explosion of possibility that we don't currently have. So just touching on AR, and I know that Inez mentioned this earlier, but AR, only a couple of weeks ago at the Google I/O conference, they announced that they haven't put a date on it, but introducing AR into Google Maps and directions. So this is only going to, they're gathering a whole lot of information, they're profiling it, they're using things like AR to help fuel better customer experiences, and in this case, a very simple case, helping people get around a city. But what could you do with AR in your industries or your verticals? So I'm going to wrap up today with two final slides. This one is really about understanding that this next wave of connected things, we have to start thinking about industries or verticals in a different way. So we know what happened to music, over the last sort of 15 years. We used to go into a store, buy a CD, overpriced CD, but that's now shifted to getting inspiration anywhere, YouTube, SoundCloud, peer-to-peer, social networks, etc., etc. And we've had to think about music as not just music, but it is an integrated part of culture now. If we think about retail, it's not about going into a store to buy something, it's about some sort of exchange. It doesn't need to be a business to a consumer, it can be peer-to-peer. It doesn't need to be a physical item, it could be something digital. But we have to think about these verticals in a different way. Healthcare, I mentioned before, but imagine a world where currently you go into a doctor when you're sick. I've got a cough, please diagnose me, give me some antibiotics, and hopefully I'll be better in 5 days' time. But imagine a world where your house or your phone or something in your home can tell you that if you keep going the way you're going to be sick next week. Or your shoes can tell you that if you keep running the way you're going or with the wrong shoes, that you're going to need a knee reconstruction in a few years' time. Super, super important because this is going to fundamentally change what we currently think of as healthcare. We have to start thinking about things in a different way. Transport. It's highly, highly unlikely my 2-year-old daughter will ever need to own a car. Already at the moment, the cost of car ownership is fundamentally changing. There's Uber around, there's taxis at the fraction of the cost of owning a car. It's just in a few years' time, they're just going to be autonomous vehicles driving around on demand, available at any time, anywhere. And the stats are that of all car ownership, 90% of the time it's sitting there turned off, locked away. So imagine a world of possibility where you're taking 200 million cars off the road. They're working a whole lot more, and they're just on demand at 10% of the cost of ownership of what you currently have in car ownership today. We have to start thinking about it in a different way. It's not about owning a car, it's about just using someone else's whenever you need it. And Inez is going to talk very, very shortly about blockchain. And so I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but we have to start thinking about banking or the storage of things in different ways. It's not about banking, the decentralization or the disintermediarization of banking is going to have a huge impact. So it's not about opening an account and having things in that account all the time. It's about storing value in other ways, on SIM cards, on the blockchain, in cryptocurrency, in other ways. Now, it may seem very futuristic right now, but we're right on the edge of some of this change. And we have to start thinking about the what ifs as this starts becoming more mainstream. And what are your policies for dealing with some of these things as they come about? So start thinking about them now. And what are you going to do about them as they start becoming a reality in some of your industries? And are you going to be on the leading edge of the wave? Or are you going to be scrambling to stay on the wave when someone comes out of the blue into one of your verticals and sweeps your industry as you know it off its feet, upside down, shifts it sideways? It may not even be someone that's around today. So a few things just to think about. Don't think about 5G as a technology. Forget about it. It's just this wireless thing that's going to help facilitate things. But what are those possibilities if and when this is here? It's not far away. 2020 is only 18 months away. You've got to start thinking, if you're using Wi-Fi or you have physical outlets and you're using Wi-Fi as data capture, when we shift to a 5G world and the accessibility and the cost of data continues to decrease, that really bad customer experience of having to log on with your email address and give some sort of data for some sort of value in return, which is going to eradicate itself over time and only be fueled by 5G coming around. You have to start rethinking that policy now. Is how are you going to collect that data in other ways? Start planning that out now. The next two might be fairly obvious, but what is the opportunity in your vertical for mixed reality or virtual reality? Is it helping people overlay something into their existing worlds on their existing devices? Or is it starting to prepare for a wave of disruption that might come? If you're in entertainment, what might happen when people might be able to watch the Foo Fighters at Madison Square Garden and not go down the road to Etihad Stadium or whatever you've got here? And then lastly, what does prevention mean to you? What does prevention rather than cure mean for your industry? So when the world moves to knowing that you're going to be sick next week, or knowing that you need a reconstruction in a few years' time, what does that same paradigm shift look like in your industry? What happens when people don't want to store value in your accounts anymore and they want to store it in other ways? So have a think about what prevention means in your industry and start thinking about being on the leading edge of that wave as it starts to come through your industries.